All right, so welcome. This is a webinar offered by the Forest Stewards Guild this time on the topic of foresters for the birds, a national view. When I was talking with Xander about this webinar, then we do have activities that are going on or that we know about happening in different parts of the country. And at first I wanted to have Xander to let me tell you about everything that's going on everywhere, but he didn't really want me to do that because these are more about Q&A. So I'd love to get to know all of you better and to eventually get to do a webinar that focuses on your geographic areas of interest. So I'm excited. Thank you for typing your where you're from and where you're interested in into the chat box. I see a lot of folks from the Lake States. I see folks from federal agencies, from the American Bird Conservancy, state agencies, forest products companies. So this is great. Thank you so much for joining. All right. So today, this is part of the series of webinars that the Guild is offering for FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, around the National Risk Assessment and addressing some topics under the new Controlled Wood Standard. Today is still Wednesday, March 18th, and I am Amanda Mahaffey. I am the Deputy Director of one of the two Deputy Directors of the Forest Stewards Guild. I'm based over in Brunswick, Maine. So again, I'm going to try to mute folks' lines and just see if we can keep the background noise down. I plan to speak for approximately 20 minutes, we'll see. And I want to allow plenty of time for Q&A, and I look forward to hearing from you on the line as well as in the chat box. So feel free to type something into the chat box if you have a question. I'll probably wait till I finish speaking to address it at the end, and we can always flip back through slides, but here we go. So before we really truly dive in, I just want to acknowledge up front that this is a really difficult time for everybody right now. I'm sure everyone has been aware of the COVID-19 virus outbreak and all the implications that it has for people that we know, people that we will know. So I just want to acknowledge up front that this is a challenging time. And with today's webinar, we are trying to keep moving forward with our important work in forest stewardship one step at a time. But I recognize that probably like me, all of you have this COVID-19 thing in the back of your minds. So we're all in the same boat here. We'll do our best to move forward and do what we can do in the face of adversity. So diving in, today, I wanted to talk about what is Foresters for the Birds, outline some of the major project components, talk about where the program is active that I know of so far. I know that there are other places where people have talked about it and we haven't quite gotten a program started quite yet. I want to give you a little taste of what a workshop is like, and then certainly allow lots of time for questions and comments. So, what is Foresters for the Birds? Foresters for the Birds, according to the Audubon Vermont website, which Audubon Vermont and the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation co-founded Foresters for the Birds in 2008. So Foresters for the Birds is an innovative project that works to keep forests as forests, as opposed to developed, and common birds common, so not focused on rare and endangered birds, although it does address birds whose populations are in decline, by helping landowners, so focus on landowners, integrate the practices of timber and songbird habitat management. So those two things working together. The project was established through a partnership between Audubon Vermont and the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation in 2008 and has grown quite a bit in the last 12 years to become a network of foresters, biologists, and forest landowners across Vermont and the Atlantic Flyway, and now across the country, who are working together to make a positive difference for forests, birds, and land stewardship in the region. The project vision and long-term outcomes, I will read to you what's on the slide. So starting in Vermont, the vision is to create healthy forests that provide suitable breeding and post-breeding habitat conditions for a suite of priority birds and sustained yields of timber and other forest products and services along the Atlantic Flyway. So very much habitat biology and timber management going hand in hand. So parts of that vision are forest plans that manage for bird habitat and timber. Parcelization and fragmentation rates would be reduced. So again, that's part of the keeping forests as forest vision. And priority bird species, which we'll talk a little about, will stabilize or increase along the flyway. Those are the overall vision and long-term outcomes for the Foresters for the Birds project. So what's a flyway? Here's a graphical representation on the left-hand side, and along the Atlantic seaboard, the Atlantic flyway certainly is an area that has a lot of bird activity. For songbirds, and pardon me, I'm a forester, not a bird biologist, but I've gotten to hang out with a lot of really cool biologists, ornithologists, and wildlife habitat specialists that know a lot more about birds than I do. So it's pretty remarkable to me, since trees don't move very far, that birds will move sometimes as much as 10,000 miles, flying from South America up to, like Maine and Canada, and they return north in the summertime to take advantage of all the insects. We have lots of, black flies and other insects, and also caterpillars and other juicier bits of protein. And they consume those and use our forest as nesting and breeding habitat. And so the idea is to try to keep this forest as forest and to make sure that it can be a, quote, baby bird factory for these birds going forward. I also inserted a graphical image of forest in the United States. So you can see where there is a lot of forest, there are also a lot of forest songbirds. When you put it together, you can see that we are pretty rich in bird life, especially in the Northeast, and also where several of you on the webinar are from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan. The bird species richness is really wonderful in the kind of the northern tier of the forest, which is why this program started in Vermont and has expanded and is very strong in the Northeast. And it's certainly expanded to other parts of the country as well. So who makes it happen? Foresters for the birds, it depends on foresters, and so there's a lot of training and materials for foresters, which I'll describe. It also depends on landowners, and that might be who some of you are interested in reaching. Birds are a great way to tell the story of how forests can benefit from thoughtful forest management. Lots of landowners have been unengaged in managing their forests, and because they're interested in birds, even if they're not interested in cutting trees, they're willing to begin to see the forest from the bird's perspective and understand that by managing, manipulating, modifying that habitat, that they can improve habitat for birds that they want to see and generate some income and hopefully consider getting a forest management plan that will help keep their forest as forest for the long term, which is what we all want to see. And that goes hand in hand with sustainable timber markets. I should say that the original program, Foresters for the Birds, was not only designed to keep forests as forests, but it also, in Vermont, especially, was focused on older forest habitat, so more late successional, older growth characteristics that are really natural habitat for a lot of the forest songbirds whose populations have been in decline over time across the Northeast. So there have been other states that have adopted, young forest focus or something a little bit different, but the original program was more designed to focus on older forest or trying to increase older forest characteristics, which I know is of interest to folks within the FSC community. So some of the project components. So Audubon Vermont has developed a series of guidebooks. They have silviculture with birds in mind, birds with silviculture in mind, and the Birder's Dozen. These are really hot commodities, so I encourage you to check them out on the Audubon Vermont website. And it's hard to get the hard copies anymore, but you can find them. And similarly, once this project started in Vermont, it spread to other states. So in Maine, we have forestry for Maine birds. Rhode Island has forestry for Rhode Island birds. I don't know if you can see my camera here, but we have the Forestry for Rhode Island Birds guide that just came out. And they created their own little silviculture with birds in mind guidebook, which has the habitat diagrams as well as a picture of the bird and a description of some of the information about their habitat, about their food, and where you might find them in the forest. So Rhode Island's working on putting theirs online. Maine, Vermont, others have their guidebooks online. New York has their guidebook online as well. So these materials are out there. So not only guidebooks for landowners and for foresters, but there's also habitat assessments that can be done and field data sheets, which can cross-section really well with forest inventory. That's just adding a few more layers to it. And then also a logger guide. So in Maine, we've been able to work with the logging community more directly as well. Another component of the project is workshops. So this is the really fun part when you get in the woods with other folks. Sometimes you have all these audiences together, foresters, loggers, woodland owners, land trusts, that are in the woods together and learning to see the forest for the birds. It's pretty awesome. And you get to learn something new, and you get to be part of a conversation and really part of a community that comes to understand and appreciate the forest from the birds' perspective. I should also say, especially in Maine, we emphasize the fact that if you manage for a suite of birds, then you actually are benefiting a larger suite of wildlife. So that's one of the hidden focuses. So they're there for the birds, but they actually benefit lots of other species of wildlife. Another component that Audubon Vermont and Connecticut and others have offered is technical assistance. So they'll do a forest bird habitat assessment on your property. They might review your management plan or help you to add sections to it that will make it more bird friendly. And they'll help implement or do a consultation if you're talking about conducting a timber harvest. So some of these technical services are available. Different states have also developed demonstration areas. In Vermont, the Green Mountain Audubon Center is a really good example of this. If you want a little more detail on that, another webinar series that I've worked on is the Northern Institute of Applied Climate Science webinar series on forest climate adaptation. And so we featured some of Steve Hagedoo's work from Audubon Vermont, where he described the forest climate adaptation and the forest carbon mitigation benefits of the management that they're doing there. So I can't fit it all into today's webinar, but there's other resources where we can provide more detail. So demonstration areas are a very valuable way for foresters, loggers, landowners, land trust folks to learn about how do you actually manage a forest and what does that mean and how does it benefit birds. So another component is the bird-friendly maple project. So Steve Hagedoo in Audubon Vermont is leading this. I believe New York is working on this as well. But they're focusing on maple syrup products that are from really bird-friendly habitat. So that program is new and developing, but if you're interested, I can get you their contact info. So as far as I know I'm probably missing a few states, but these are several of the states that have grown or are growing a Foresters for the Birds program. And it's really exciting to see this because all across the country where we have tens of millions of acres of private land ownerships, then we
actually had three at the same time.
Sorry, we're hearing a little bit of background noise. If someone could make sure your phone is muted, that would be great. Thanks. So let's see. So these are states that have all or either have or are developing Foresters for the Birds programs. And I know that there's probably more that I don't know about, but most of these have been in touch with Audubon Vermont to help try to continue the formula for success with this program. So I'll give you a snapshot from a couple of states real quick. So North Carolina, just as an example of how they've adapted the Foresters for the Birds program in North Carolina, they have the Forest Landbird Legacy Program. And you can see the kind of the subtitle, they're trying to preserve, but there's a lot of management in there, forest blocks across the state. So what does that look like on the ground? Well, in North Carolina, as several of you are probably familiar, they have the coastal plain habitat, really flat, a lot of bottomland hardwoods. Then they have the Piedmont, where there's an opportunity to improve hardwood silviculture. And then they have the mountains in Appalachia and areas where I know there are some FSC mills that are definitely interested in trying to improve forest conditions through forest certification. So within North Carolina, Audubon North Carolina has been partnering with a lot of organizations to try to help get more habitat management implemented on the ground and to try to share the idea of managing your forest with birds in mind. I was fortunate to be able to be part of a Foresters for the Birds workshop in June 2018, which was co-sponsored by Enviva, and it was focused on bird-friendly bottomland hardwood forest management. So I have, I don't know if you can see my camera, but I still have my binder from that. So this is one of the resources that Audubon North Carolina puts together. So in it, we had our agenda, we had snapshots of the different stands that we visited, some detailed information, and we have snapshots of some of the birds that we would hope to see in that bottomland habitat. So again, a really good resource, and so you don't have to have a published guidebook necessarily to have an impactful bit of outreach material that can help your organization help get more bird-friendly habitat management happen on the ground. Another quick snapshot is New York State. So this is a snapshot from their website, and you can see right up front, they put their goals for acres that they want to have under bird-friendly forest management in New York and in Connecticut, who they partner with. So right there, whether you're a landowner who cares about birds or a forester or a logger, you can go to the website and learn a little bit more about what they do. New York has developed some really cool guides, and so I encourage you to visit their website as well. So this is Audubon, New York, and so they have a really in-depth landowner's guide, a forester's guide. They have a demonstration forest, a forest fact sheet, and they're always actively trying to work with more landowners. So this is just another snapshot. So workshop time for all of you. So I don't know if you can, hopefully you can see me on my camera, but so here's what you got to do. You got to take your 3 fingers on your left hand. This is my left hand, and take your three fingers on your right hand. Now I can't see you, so I'm going to trust that you're doing this. This is your handy assessment tool, and I'm going to explain how this works. So on your left hand, these are live things, and on your right hand, these are dead habitat features that you would find in a forest. So on your left hand, this helps you remember overstory, midstory, and understory. So when we're talking overstory, we're talking 30 feet and above. So I always tell folks in the field, imagine a 3-story building. So from there and up, you're talking, that's the overstory that you're looking at. And then the mid-story is 6 to 30 feet, as you can see on the PowerPoint. So 6 to 30 feet. So I'm 5'4", so when I'm standing up and not at a computer screen, it'll be a little bit above my head, all the way up to that 3-story in height area. So that's your mid-story. And then your understory is 0 to 6 feet, so going up to here if I'm standing. So within each of those vegetation layers, there are certain birds that key in on how much cover there is, how much vegetative cover. So what does vegetative cover look like? This is just a simple graphic, and the birds don't read the graphs, but they do sort of think in terms of, is it very low cover? Is it low? Is it, kind of medium? Or is it a high amount of cover? So when we're in the field, which I wish I could have you all in the field right now, if you're in the field and you imagine it's a midsummer's day and the leaves are fully out, spring has long since sprung and you have shade everywhere. So the idea is how much shade is produced, like say high noon when the sun is right overhead, how much shade is produced by the leaves and the woody material that's above your head in each of those layers. So different birds, again, will key into how much shade they have in those different layers. And there's a list of some, this is from a Forestry for Maine Birds guidebook. But these are some of the birds that you would find that really key into those habitat features. So again, that's your live things on your left hand. So just a quick snapshot of things on your right hand. So on your right hand, your uppermost finger, we're talking about tall things, so snags and decaying trees. Then we'd also be talking about coarse woody material and also fine woody material. And you could use your pinky finger to remember hardwood leaf litter. So why are dead things important in the woods? So here's an example. The yellow-bellied sapsucker. The populations here right now appear stable, but they certainly have been in decline. This is a really cool bird, and you'll I don't know if I can play the drumming calls if this will work. I'm a little hesitant to do that, but it's you can look it up. But it'll make this kind of like this rapid fire drumming sound, and then it kind of slows down as if it's losing steam. And you'll see these guys. They hammer on buildings. They hammer on stop signs. They're kind of silly, but they do drill into the sap, which attracts insects, which they can then eat. So a really cool bird, and it's a good reminder of why the habitat features for snags and decaying trees are important. So again, the population right now is not doing terribly in most places, but historically it has experienced some decline. So it's the kind of bird that we want to keep an eye on. And again, these are more common birds that we're trying to keep common, not necessarily birds that are in danger. These are birds that speak to a certain habitat feature in the forest that can be achieved through thoughtful forest management. So snags, so you might find them in the forest. And certainly the yellow-bellied sapsucker and some of its comrades are going to be out there keying in on those snags. So what does that mean operationally? Well, when we do workshops for loggers, this is an example slide that we will share. So if you're operating and you're trying to retain snags, then we encourage loggers to make sure that it's operationally safe to do so, but to look for snags, try to have the bigger the better. If you can leave, like if you can leave a cluster, if you have the choice of laying out your own roads, or if or where you lay the boom, then you can choose to protect and retain a snag or a potential snag that's developing. Again, where it's operationally safe to do so. Overall, 6 or more per acre, and the bigger the better. So the bigger the snag, the more birds and other species of wildlife can make use of that habitat feature. If you knock all the snags down, then you're missing a chance to help some birds. Leaving felled snags in place is another thing that that loggers can do. And then trying to recruit snags. If we've had an ice storm or a windstorm, then you might have broken tops or large dead limbs. So leaving those habitat features on the ground is something that loggers can do. So again, this is just an example from using a bird, the yellow-bellied sapsucker, down into what you can do to engage landowners and what you can do to engage loggers to actually do something about it. So there have been awesome workshops all across the country in different places. I know there was a workshop in Minnesota that Mark Jacobs from Aiken County hosted a couple years ago. I didn't get to get a picture of that in here, but it's just a great way to get out in the field and learn and get people excited about managing their forest thoughtfully with birds in mind. So we do have a few key contacts here. I should mention, so the role that the Forest Stewards Guild has played, we didn't come up with the Foresters for the Birds program. What we do is we have provided some of the forester voice in it, and we've facilitated spreading the program across the country as much as we can. So if we hear people, like I had friends in Rhode Island, like they wanted to do this program. So I talked with them, helped them get connected with Steve Hagenboo, and helped share some resources that could help them develop their guides. And so now they're doing workshops, and they're reaching out to landowners and getting more folks interested in forest management there. The Guild is also working in Oregon. So we have a contractor there, Gregor Yaniga, who is working on kind of in the greater Portland area for now. We hope to leverage that to increase more activities around the state. But he's working with a lot of partners locally to try to engage landowners and develop their own Oregon-focused guides for bird-friendly forest management. And there's other folks, so North Carolina, Amy Tomcho, Suzanne Traeger in New York, Sally Stockwell here in Maine. And there's other folks around the country that would be great for you to get in contact with if you're interested in doing something more with the program. So with that, I will take any questions or comments. Let's maybe start with the chat box. If you have a question or something that's popped into mind in the chat box, then we can start there. And then from the chat box, then we can open up the phone lines. So I'd love to get some discussion going. I'll give you a minute or two to type your questions into the chat box. I'm sure somebody's typing, but I don't get to see the little dot like on a cell phone. So. Aha, first question. So what was the data collection habitat correlation effort that went into creating the silviculture guide? Really good question. I meant to grab my copy of Forestry for Maine Birds before I started the webinar, and I didn't get around to it. So when in developing the data collection, the data assessment sheet, and again, a lot of this is on the Maine Audubon website, and I think Audubon Vermont has their habitat data collection sheet as well. I know that the folks that we partnered with were looking into existing studies by biologists, so kind of from the birds' perspective on what density of vegetation, kind of what height they consider to be overstory, midstory, understory, et cetera, and work to develop a habitat assessment sheet. So then the important thing was partnering with foresters to develop a sheet that made sense to foresters. So for example, and I'm sorry I can't give all of the details on one webinar. So for example, just the terminology that we use. So in Maine, we talk about northern hardwood forest. or we talk about northern softwood forest, and that might be a forest habitat association, broad picture. Within that, we're used to, foresters are used to talking about, spruce fir forest or spruce fir hemlock. And so we have to pair the forest types that are a little more narrow that a forester is used to talking about with the forest habitat associations that, bird folks are used to talking about, and make sure that we're speaking the same language. So when it comes to creating a habitat sheet, when you look at the actual data sheet, which there's a copy in Forestry for Maine Birds, and also I know in Vermont on their website, then what you end up seeing is a lot of typical forest inventory information, but it's put slightly differently. So, for example, overstory, you collect species, you collect vegetation cover, which is something you may or may not collect in a forest inventory. Canopy cover as opposed to crown closure. And then overall, the birds are looking at overstory and sometimes overstory, midstory combined, and then understory. So that's just an example. And I would encourage you to look at the actual habitat or the actual data sheet to get some more detail. I'd be happy to try to talk through that with you or point you to people that help develop those more specifically. So I hope that helped sort of answer your question. I'm going to move on to Kayla's question. So can you expand on the Forest Guild's role in helping to promote and carry out these programs? Sure thing. So let's see. So again, it started with Audubon, Vermont, in partnership with the Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation. And so luckily for us, a lot of the folks in Vermont, in both of those organizations that started it, are members of the Forest Stewards Guild. And over here in New England, people know each other pretty well from state to state. And so when we heard about a good idea in Vermont, and then they talked to their friends at Maine Audubon and Maine Forest Service and said, hey, we'd love to do this in Maine. So the guild members were able to play a role because it aligns very much with our mission of putting the forest first in forest management and trying to promote ecological forestry that benefits the forest and the human communities that depend upon it. So a lot of the role of the guild is as kind of a connector and a convener. And when it comes to the work in Maine, for example, where I'm based, then I play a role in providing, getting folks together in providing some input from the foresters side. And initially, we started with focus groups, and we wanted to make sure that we had folks in different parts of the state on board. So I saw a question about industry, federal land managers. Yeah, I will come to that. In northern Maine, we have more industrial foresters, and so if Audubon said, hey, we want you to manage for older forests everywhere, that would not have gone over well necessarily. So part of the role that the Guild played in helping expand this program was to sort of be a translator, a convener, a middle person to try to help explain, from the bird's perspective, what's beneficial to foresters. Why would industrial forest loggers want to manage forests with birds in mind? So that's a lot of the role that I have gotten to play as a forester within the Guild. But again, we have wildlife biologists that are Guild members that have been active in helping expand this. So I hope that, and then again, broadly, the Guild is an organization. A lot of what we do, not only with Foresters for the Birds, but with other programs nationally, we try to convene folks. We bring different agencies and organizations together and try to leverage the impact that all of those are trying to accomplish their own missions around a common project. So with Foresters for the Birds, in Maine, Maine Audubon, Maine Forest Service, Maine Inland Fisheries and Wildlife have been key partners. When we got to go down to North Carolina, help out with a workshop there, they already had an active partnership between Audubon, Vermont, and North Carolina Forest Service. And we helped try to bring in another dimension with consulting foresters and trying to increase outreach to different categories of landowners. So we try to just enhance good work that's going on and bring people together to help kind of stir up the pot and give them a chance to start the project in their own area. I hope that helped a little bit, and I'd be happy to talk further. I'm going to go on to the next question. So James asks, this appears to be focused toward private small landowners. Have you outreached to federal land managers such as the U.S. Forest Service or BLM in Oregon? Really good question. So again, the program started definitely with a focus on private small landowners, and small is relative because, for example, I was in New Jersey, and New Jersey Audubon was interested in getting this program going in New Jersey. So when folks from Vermont said, well, we have a minimum of 200 acres, New Jersey folks looked at each other kind of like, our average acreage size is 12 acres. That's not going to work so well here. So again, part of the role of the Guild has been to help translate this, the program from different landscapes. So I'd say in the Lake States, my colleague, Mike Lynch, who's based in Minnesota, has definitely tried. I know he's talked with some of the folks here at the American Bird Conservancy about trying to get Forest for the Birds started in Minnesota. So there's been a bit of outreach involved. I don't have all the bird conservation region maps in my PowerPoint. That's another kind of detail. But in the Northeast, our states are relatively small, and there's a lot of crisscross intersection between states and agencies and organizations, and we don't have a huge federal presence here, but we do have a lot of private land ownership. So again, that's why we've been focused on small private landowners more so than federal partners. But when you move to the Lake States, and then when you move to the Western United States, it's a whole different ballgame. So the bird conservation regions, birds, that help define birds or areas where birds would be a focus. Those are much bigger geographically, and then the land ownerships are much bigger, and there's a lot more federal land. So we have not yet fostered just the right partnership with the right federal land managers in kind of the Minnesota Great Lakes region, which we're working on, or out west in Oregon. But we definitely are interested. And so kind of starting where we have had success with kind of the private land ownerships, that's where we started. But it takes time to build partnerships and make sure that folks are on board with it. So, for example, if you're in Oregon and you say, marbled murrelet or spotted owl, some people don't want to talk to you. So we've definitely been kind of careful in how we bring the message to new landscapes where when you talk about managing the forest for the birds, it can mean something completely different. So really good question and really good point. We would love to expand this and try to make sure that it feels comfortable and accessible to all ownership types. So I'm sure there are other questions out there. Let's see, we have tons and tons of time. Let's see, so the next question I'm seeing, since the program has been developed, how many acres of forest land have been added to the Foresters for the Birds program and conserved as a working forest? That's a really good question. I don't have the answer to it. I think that state by state, you need to talk with the folks and see how many acres have been conserved. So how many acres have been conserved is one part of the question, but there's also how many acres have come under management that was bird friendly. So for example, how many habitat assessments did Connecticut do? They got a grant that was focused on delivering, on providing habitat assessments to landowners. So how many of those did they get a habitat plan for, whether or not it is conserved in the conservation easement sense, or did active management happen on it? As you know, in forestry, it takes time to make things happen on the ground. So for some folks, if they've got a plan and they've been lining up for a timber harvest, that's progress already, even if the acres of conservation don't reflect actual management for birds. So they're in it for the long term. The program's been around for 12 years and has been growing steadily over that time. So I don't know the actual acres, but that's not the only metric that kind of speaks to the success of the program. I think the outreach to people and getting people to change their perspectives and being open to forest management is also kind of a key metric for success. So I'm sorry I don't have the acres for you. Let's see. Okay, and so Xander's asking if I can share examples of how Foresters for the Birds contributes to keeping forests as forests. So that's a really good question. So certainly in parts of Maine, and I know that this is the case in parts of other states as well, parcelization and fragmentation. I mentioned that earlier on as one of Audubon Vermont's goals with the program and their vision for the program over time. So if you're a landowner and let's say you're working a landowner, you like harvesting timber any chance you can, you might get your tractor out there. You don't really like talking to foresters because they're kind of like the government, but in any case, maybe that's been your focus, and then your grandparents are sick and you need to help get them some elderly care. well, you have this woodlot, so what do I do? Well, hey, I could clear cut it, or maybe since I'm living close to the big city, maybe I can sell off some of that land, and they could put up a Walmart there and give me a lot of money from for my land. Well, so Foresters for the Birds just gets folks to think about the broader habitat benefits, the broader benefits to them and to the community for keeping that forest as forest. One of the elements of it, again, I don't have a good map handy, but when we do a workshop, we might visit a parcel that's, say, 40 acres or a couple hundred acres, depending on how long the workshop is. But we also like to start it off with a big map. I can't show you how big, but we start off with a big map that shows on the landscape scale, so around 2,500 acres. Where does this little property fit into that picture on the landscape scale? And people, and woodlot owners especially, they like going up to the map and they look and they point their finger and they see where they are on that map and where they fit into that landscape scale. Because from the birds' perspective, a lot of these birds care about what happens in the 2,500 acres around them. Why do you live in the state that you live in? Do you live near other people? Do you live near a town center? Do you live further out? Well, some of the birds are thinking kind of the same way, and so they care about what happens in the broader landscape. So by using birds to help tell that story, it gets people to see kind of the bigger picture of the benefits of keeping the forest on their land and around them as forest. So I hope that helps answer the question. I'm happy to take more questions. It seems like we have a ton of time. Type. Aha, all right, Mim, thank you. Okay. So Mim asks, has there been a crosswalk developed that links NRCS equip activities and Foresters for the Birds in any of the states? That is an excellent question. And yes, actually, so Rhode Island, let's see. In Rhode Island, the Forestry for Rhode Island Birds program was actually funded by an NRCS SIG, or Conservation Innovation Grant, CIG. As they were developing it, they obviously were thinking about NRCS and how to involve NRCS. So under the NRCS cost share activities, I believe there's like program 666, and there's a couple others under EQIP that are Foresters for the Birds friendly. So there are, and forgive me for not remembering the actual management activities under NRCS EQIP, but yes, there are programs that are developed. My understanding with NRCS is that it kind of depends where you are in the state and where you are on the landscape and who your agents are in that area for how engaged or helpful or how well they might understand NRCS and forest bird management or forest bird friendly management. So there are NRCS landowners are getting NRCS cost share funds for EQIP activities in different states. Sorry, I don't have the numbers for you. That's definitely happening, but some of it really depends on who your local NRCS agent is who can help walk you through that process. So I hope that helps answer your question. Let's see, Peter asks, is this program providing financial assistance for getting forest management plans written for non-industrial private forest land owners? If so, are FMPs written to meet NRCS criteria so that landowners would be eligible for NRCS financial assistance programs for implementation? And thank you, 666 is Forest and Improvement, FSI, thank you. I know for bridges or temporary bridges and some other activities that there are other related cost share programs available. So I didn't get into the details, but birds and like riparian habitat management, following BMPs. So another really good example where managing for birds, it's something you're probably already doing already. If you're following BMPs, remind people that they should be following and exceeding their BMPs. So that also dovetails with NRCS with different NRCS practices for improving stream habitat, or if you're going to conduct a timber harvest, putting in a good water crossing. So sorry, Peter, to answer your question, so different programs are providing financial assistance for getting forest management plans written. So I believe Connecticut and North Carolina and Vermont had done that in the past when they had a different pot of funding. And so are those plans being written to meet NRCS criteria? The answer, like many things in forestry, is it depends. So it depends on who is involved in the management plan writing. One of the challenges in Maine, for instance, is that NRCS provides a significant chunk of cost share to get an NRCS plan written, and you can have an NRCS TSP or technical service provider that can write a management plan for you. But there's other kinds of plans available that aren't as costly or maybe as cost effective as an NRCS plan, depending on the size of your woodlot, et cetera. So Maine has a woods-wise stewardship plan. And then, of course, you're probably familiar with the tree farm program, the American tree farm system. So a tree farm program plan doesn't have to specifically reference NRCS criteria. So the NRCS would be kind of like, the gold standard, or just like as fancy of a plan as you can get in a lot of places, because it's, it can be pretty detail oriented, and it really requires you to think hard about your goals and activities on your land. So not all management plans are written to meet NRCS criteria, but because NRCS has cost share funds available, a lot of programs in different states are trying to steer landowners in that direction of getting an NRCS forest management plan written so that they can be eligible for those cost share funds. I hope that helps, Peter. All right. Xander asks, have you seen Foresters for the Birds help to connect with conservation owners, land trusts or private owners focused on preservation, and lead to active management options that meet their goals? Yeah, so yes, definitely. So when we started this program in Maine in about 2013, 2014, then initially a lot of our audiences in these workshops were foresters. We had a lot of foresters that were seeking licensing credits or kind of curious about this, Foresters for the Birds thing. And now a lot of them are pretty bought in. And then we partnered with the Maine Certified Logging Professional Program, and we've been able to deliver some workshops, presentations at logger trainings. But over time, we've gotten a lot more interest from land trusts. Unfortunately, it's been canceled due to the COVID virus, but there's the Maine Land Conservation Conference this year, and then for the last 2 years, typically they've been really excited to have a Forestry for Maine Birds workshop or theme integrated into the program. And so the Maine Land Conservation Conference, all the land trusts in the entire state of Maine will come to that, and they really love this message. So out of that conference and others, we've received a lot of invitations to come and speak about this. Not just to the land trust staff, but to the members of a land trust. So a lot of private forest land owners who are thinking about preservation. Another thing, certainly true in the Northeast and probably true elsewhere, a lot of lands that had been conserved, or maybe more accurately preserved under conservation easement, in the 90s, into the early 2000s. At that time, people thought, oh, well, the forest will just stay the way it is. No, it doesn't do that. So, so the forest certainly has been changing over time, and as we've experienced, invasive pests and pathogens, and as we've experienced crazy, winter storms or windstorms that really change the forest, then folks, even in the more preservationist community, have realized that, oh, maybe managing the forest would be a good thing. So how do you do that, and how do you bridge something that can be scary for folks? Well, birds are a great way to do that. They're really the poster child for thoughtful forest management. So we've definitely been able to use Foresters for the Birds to help make that a much more friendly transition for folks in the land trust and conservation and even the preservation communities. So hope that helps. These are really good questions. I'm sure there are some more. We definitely have 15 more minutes or so if you have additional questions you want to type. I bet somebody out there is typing. I'll give you a moment to do that, and then if I don't see a question out there, then I could invite you to open up your phone line. I'll give you another 10 seconds to finish typing.
This is Xander. I'm a slow typer, so I'll unmute myself.
Okay.
And I think one question that I'd be interested to hear from participants is whether the point of today's webinar is kind of lay out the national view of Foresters for the Birds and some of the general characteristics with some good examples that Amanda provided. But then I think there's some follow-on. I think so one question, thinking about our overarching goal of mitigating the risk proposed by controlled wood in some areas around conversion. Do you see this as a useful tool for messaging around keeping forests as forests. We're producing these various fact sheets and educational materials. So our one thought is we'll do a sort of general why conversion is a threat to a lot of things, including forests. But then, do you feel like with the people you work with or in the areas you work, whether something targeted around Foresters for the Birds would help in that regard? So that's a question for everybody else. But Amanda, obviously, you have a lot of experience with this. So if you have any thoughts, that'd be great too.
Yeah, I would certainly think so. And I encourage folks to start typing your own answers into the chat box. And after I stop talking, I'd love to let you unmute your line. And if you have something to share out loud, to do that as well. But certainly in my experience, I think it is potentially an effective tool. There are, again, it takes time to build the trust in a program like this. To get the trust from the forest management community, to get trust from bird biologists who might have not thought about cutting trees, although that's certainly been changing through this program, and to get trust from the public, because there's always people that still see a logging truck and they think that means it's bad. And yes, there can be bad logging, but there's an awful lot of good that's happening out there. So this program, again, by using birds to tell the story, really helps change the public perception and community's perception, and certainly in places where you have landowners or smaller communities that might be less prone to changing the world around them or changing their forests. This is a really good way to help get that message across and bring people together. Just an example, in Holton, Maine, there's a Maine Forest Service district forester who organizes workshops, every fall, and we did a Foresters to the Birds theme a couple years ago, and so he has foresters and landowners and loggers that get together, once a year, and they're all neighbors, they're friends. They might do different work, but they get together and they like to learn about this kind of topic together. And we had a really great workshop because they trust the Maine Forest Service, which was definitely a key partner. And folks just had a really good time, like learning together in the woods to see the forest from the bird's perspective. So I think it can definitely be beneficial. I see Rebecca wrote, I think having the flyer and webinars can be for us or for the U.S. in general on conversion. United States for the U.S. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think probably that makes sense. I mean, one of the things we talked about with at least some people on this call with the old growth flyer was trying to hone in a little bit on the specifics, in this case in the Pacific Northwest, and we'll do similar for the Intermountain West. But rather than making people feel like, oh, old growth internationally, globally, and it sort of becomes too big to deal with, maybe in this case, having a generalized flyer, but we do have some resources already online. So if someone says, oh, I'm interested in this and I want to know what it looks like in North Carolina, they can kind of hone in. So maybe that's the best of both worlds. It looks like James, go ahead.
Yeah, reading James's comment. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, James. I'll just read it out loud for the recording. James says, I'm familiar with a similar program in the Klamath region of California and Oregon. The Klamath Bird Observatory, in partnership with a number of organizations, created a landowner oak guide, similar to the Foresters for the Birds guides, specifically to restore oak woodlands and savannas, which are being degraded by fire exclusion and past management activities, which favored other species. They worked with the NRCS and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, partners in wildlife, to implement treatments with cost assistance. That's really great to hear. We do have another Guild staff person who partners with the KLSFHP, Klamath Lake Forest Health Partnership. Kendall Martell is based in Lakeview, Oregon. And so I think she knows some of the folks that have been involved in that. And she has worked more on the fire side than on the bird side so far. But yeah, it's really good that there are resources like this out there. And again, just because the program started in Vermont with a focus that worked there, doesn't mean it has to look exactly the same everywhere. It certainly has been and can continue to be adapted to new landscapes where there's a specific need. And fire is a big area for potential restoration, and another part of what the Guild gets involved in. But thank you for sharing that.
Well, and it's also useful, James, to have shared that because, of course, another area of concern for controlled wood is the Calamus-Fiskew area. So I've noted this down for, we'll have future webinars on that topic, and we'll look into this and include it. So thank you.
All right. Yeah, if other folks, we do have time if you have questions, if you feel comfortable unmuting your line and you want to ask a question out loud, this is a great time to do that. I hope I'm not that scary. All right. Well, we've definitely taken the better part of an hour, and I really appreciate everybody's time on this webinar. And I'll go back. So I think Xander would be able to email out a copy of my slides, which includes contact info for a lot of the key people that have led these programs in different places. And again, I think everybody does go back to Steve Hagenbu with Audubon Vermont. But I'm also, because we work with folks on the forestry side of things, we'd be happy to share information, try to connect you with folks in your area. Or if you're interested in working with us to help launch a program, we have experience helping launch this program in different states and different places and kind of navigating the differences between states across the country. Before I leave, I see Peter added another comment. FYI, another beneficial NRCS program for getting implementation done is a Conservation Stewardship Program, CSP. There's actually a CSP enhancement for forests that references Foresters to the Birds guidance. Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that, Peter. All right. So really good information out there. We're playing the role of trying to share information, facilitate, and help cook up some new programs in places or support programs that are getting going in different places. So thanks everybody very much for your time. Take care.